Good afternoon and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the virtual educational series. I'm Chris Cubbage. I'm recording in Sydney, and we're joined and proud to be joined by Professor Martin Gill over there in the UK, London. Martin, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's good afternoon there. It's morning here, I have to say, Chris.
Perfect. Well, I think you'll find even as we do this webinar, the sun will go down here. We're just at sunset here in Sydney, so hence why you're going to get a shiny light off my balding head. Ladies and gentlemen, Martin has joined us. Martin is a renowned criminologist, if you're not aware. Let me just walk through some introductory slides for you. And one of the important aspects that we've taken the opportunity to talk to Martin here is to get the offender's perspective. We've titled it Offenders, What's Their Story? Shortly, Martin will just introduce some of the research that he's been involved with. And then I'm also going to give a bit of a background to some of the offenders I dealt with in a policing career, but then also even as a security professional, you're constantly dealing with offenders in some respect. Martin and I have known each other for some years. We can go back to his recent visit in Sydney a couple of years ago. So we have done a podcast with Martin previously. And I think Martin, many years ago, assisted me with a CCTV paper during my studies. So again, well-renowned. For those that want to stay in touch with Martin after this or already in touch with Martin, you'll be aware of his thought leadership webinars that he's conducting every Tuesday and Thursday. And in fact, if you want to stay up late, if you're in Australia, I'm sure you'll be able to catch his webinar tonight also. Now, the format today is the audience, it's a Q&A opportunity for you. Martin and I will just have a chat and get some insight into Martin's background and research. And then if you've got a question or you want to ask a question or take this particular discussion in a particular way, then please do so. You can raise your hand and ask questions. But in that context, Martin, hang on, one more slide here before I start. For those in terms of the auspice, did that go too far? No, that went too far. Did I go back to the auspice? Here we go, in the auspice. One of the key aspects with Martin in his sort of global reach in terms of what he's doing is the Outstanding Professionals, Security Professionals Awards. Those next in Australia are in October. Whether you are able to get down here, Martin, let's keep our fingers crossed. But for the audience here, Security Awards 2020 by the ASIAL, Australian Security Industry Association Limited's website as well, and we're there to support that area. So I think I'll go back one more here and keep this up. Martin, over to you. Maybe if you can introduce some of the research in the subject of offenders, what their story, and obviously it was about 20 plus books you've written. So you know, your choice in terms of how you want to describe your background.
Okay, thank you. Well, as a criminologist, one of the things that always fascinated me was what makes security good and what makes security bad. I'm just going back to the starting point of this, that one of the most striking things about talking to offenders in prison, and I've been doing this most of my career, is that when you listen to their side of the story, the fascinating insight you get is this, that when security is done well, it creates a real problem for them. But in their view, mostly it's not, and therein rests their opportunity. And this is not just an idle, interesting academic finding. I mean, the implications of this are really quite serious. And when you look at security, I think one of the most striking things about it as a subject area is that if it was a person speaking up for itself, and I think this is true of cyber and the physical world, is that you would have to say that it hasn't done a very good job of saying how good it really is. And I think one of the points about the Oscars and the awards that we do around the world is because being good at security is not just a nice thing to have. It's a fundamental part of a good society, that freedoms are protected on the one hand, of course, that corporate benefits are that it protects crime, enables the business and all of that. But the knock-on effects of being good are enormous public benefits in terms of a more secure country, a more secure company, a more secure environment in which to work in. And so that was my starting point. And when I went to speak to offenders in prison, and I was asking for their views about what makes a crime easy and what makes it difficult, what came through was this point that what makes it easy is when security isn't very good. Now, it wasn't always the words they used, but when you tease it out of them. Last year, we did a study. Every year we do an annual study. It's called the Security Research Initiative. And it's sponsored by some of the leading companies in the sector. It's been going for 16 years now. And every year we do a study. And last year, we looked at the advances in technology. And we interviewed some offenders about their views about the advances in technology. And of course, my starting point for this is that when you go to conferences and you hear people talk about technology development, I mean in the physical world and in the cyber world, it comes across as all the good that can be done, all the benefits that accrue. And of course, while that is the case, what we do know is that offenders are good at technology too. And their side of the story was they weren't scared by advances, that these create opportunities for them. And I know that's something we're going to speak about in a minute about opportunities, Chris. But one of the things I wanted to take away was, therefore, if we ignore what offenders have to say, we're ignoring a really important insight on crime. And I talk about offenders in very general terms. And there's a great book, by the way, that came out last year. It's led by Dr. Russell Brewer of the University of Adelaide, and it's called Preventing Cybercrime. And I really recommend that you read. It's a very readable book, and it's written in collaboration with other colleagues. And in that book, Russell Brewer and colleagues document a whole range of cybercrime prevention approaches and looks at whether they work or not. And here comes the great problem with research on security, that whatever you take, almost whatever you take, whether it be security officers, CCTV, you'll know about this, Chris, or cyber measures, as they show in their book, this finding comes through. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes the effect is neutral, and sometimes it makes it worse. Now, as an academic, that's a perfectly acceptable finding. Of course, as a practitioner, it's no good at all. And I appreciate that. But what is the key then to ask is, why does it sometimes work and why does it sometimes not? And you get these really, really fascinating breakdown of the factors that make security and crime prevention work. And the principles there are very similar in the cyber and the physical world. You've got sometimes a failure of concept. In other words, it wasn't the right thing to tackle the problem. Either you didn't understand the problem or you didn't understand the solution, or that it wasn't managed very effectively. They're the two broad explanations for why it fails. But here's the point. Offenders depend on it not working effectively. Because when security measures work effectively, when you've got a good understanding of the problem, you've got a very effective and appropriate response, and it works effectively, then you've got a very, very challenge for offenders. And they know there are plenty of targets. And so they move around and they play on vulnerabilities. That's why the security world has to be good at what it's done. And really, the outstanding security performance awards around the world, in Australia, it's with, as you say, the Australian National Awards and the Medals Foundation. The point about these sorts of initiatives is not just to say, aren't we great? The point is to say it matters who's good and who is not good. And that's really been a driving force behind much of the work that I've done, and much of the work that comes out of speaking to offenders. In my view, we ignore their view at our peril, because they offer really, really important insights. Can I just tell one story, Chris? I know you want to answer questions, but here's a message to the security world from a prison cell. So I was in prison interviewing offenders, and I was about to leave, actually. And this chap came up to me. I was interviewing fraudsters, including some online fraudsters and some physical fraudsters. And this chap came up to me and he said to me, your name is Martin Gill, isn't it? I said, yes. He said, you're doing interviews with fraudsters, aren't you? And I said, I am. He said, well, I couldn't speak to you today, even though I've got a conviction for fraud. He said, but before I tell you the reason why, I want to ask you a question. If I tell you a story, do you agree to tell your security audiences around the world when you give talks what I'm about to say? Now, you might think, yes, I will. But when you're in prison, you've also got to be careful about who you say yes and no to, because it depends on what they tell you. Anyway, So I said, well, I'll do my best if the story is good. And this was his story. He said, incredibly, when I was on the outside, when I worked in a company which I'd done for many years, and I was very positive about, I was in part responsible for the protection of that company against different types of crime. He said, and what was really amazing to me was that it was very difficult to get other departments interested, other departments to collaborate, getting information about offences. Even when I reported to the hierarchy, they weren't really interested, they didn't take action, and getting the police involved was even worse. They're not really involved in that. And I said, well, I've heard this story before, so I'm not overly surprised. He said, he said, but that's not the point I want you to tell your audience around the world. He said, what I want you to tell them is this. When I came into prison, the opposite was true. Here we're all sharing information. We're all swapping ideas. We're all talking about how we got caught and how we would do it differently next time. We're talking about who will be vulnerable and how you can get to them. And therein lies a message about why it's so important we understand who's good and who's not good and what offenders have to say.
I think we're definitely seeing this in the cyber realm. Cyber criminals are definitely sharing information, if not trading information as well. Do you think, because we have that transition from physical security to cyber, have you seen that sort of transition in practices as well? Because often we don't sort of build or apply security with the offender in mind. We're actually probably applying it with a budget in mind or a client in mind in terms of what their expectations will be, rather than that back to that risk assessment where we should understand what that threat is and what type of offenders are going to be looking at our security applications.
Yeah, right, and I think that's the story around the world, Chris. But in many ways, it shows the extent to which security hasn't got its message across, and it's an inevitability, I think, that if you don't do a proper risk assessment and you don't therefore make sure you've got the right measures, and you then have a purchasing processes that means that you don't take account of the risks and the effectiveness of mitigation, all perhaps a commercial inevitability, is also inevitable that it won't work effectively, or maybe not at all. You're leaving it to chance. And
Yeah.
I think one of the problems with the security world, and cyber are better than physical, but still it's the case, it hasn't been great about getting its message across about the difference between what's outstanding and what's average. And I think part of the problem is, one, as a world, it's been quite diverse, and it hasn't spoke with a united voice or a single voice. Hasn't tried that hard to do so, in my view. But the other part of this is that the people in organisations haven't been taught that there is a difference between outstanding security and poor security. Not in any meaningful way. Not like when they come through the ranks, they're learning about finance, they're learning about human resources, they're learning about operations, of course. But there isn't the same focus on security. It's a bit different. The type of people who do it are a bit different. And therefore, the challenge in getting the message across becomes all the greater.
We often hear, well, we do apply the offender triangle, or the crime triangle, means, intent and opportunity. Which is more common in terms of that intent and opportunity, and how important addressing those in a security application or a security design?
Well, I think the point I would say about this is that first thing to say is they're linked. And one of the great findings of criminologists, perhaps in the later part of the last century, and this is a finding, right, that many of those involved in preventing crime came up with this point, that opportunity is a cause of crime. In other words, if you make it easy, it becomes a reason why people will do it. And I think the world of practice would say, well, that's obvious. We've known about this for years. But it's quite, but it fits with me, you see, because when you speak to offenders in prison, there's no doubt at all that they are looking for the easy opportunity, and in my view, are good at finding it, I might add. And when I give talks to dinners and breakfasts, I gave an after dinner talk to the Law Society actually Friday night actually. It was their annual dinner, and I was the after dinner speaker. And it got I didn't get on till about 11 o'clock, so they were drunk. Let me tell you this, and it got very rowdy. And I was telling the sort of the stories from the prison cell, as it were. And one of the people afterwards said to me, what I get asked the most question, but you're speaking to those who get caught. You know, what do they know about it? But of course, most of those who I speak to get caught, who are giving me these insights, get caught very rarely. And you know, they're successful most of the time. And therein is another lesson. You know, these people are prolific and they're very, very good at what they do.
I suppose one other area I wanted to cover, and again, we open it up to questions from the audience as well. If you've got some, please write them in. The displacement of crime. We've definitely seen a sort of a displacement between nuisance crime, street-related crime, correlating with that reduction, then also correlating to a rise in online-related crime, online bullying, and other sort of cyber-related crimes as well. Same behaviour, but just in a different field or a different environment. Maybe talk through your understanding of displacement and how strong that link is too, because I think we're starting to see a little bit of displacement with COVID-19 and lockdowns.
Yeah, we are. I mean, as you say, I run a webinar on a Tuesday and Thursday afternoon is in England. In fact, you were on it, Chris, yeah. Last week. And you know, one of the things that we've done 12 so far, and these are an international audience discussing topics related to security in some way. And what's come through these 12 calls is firstly this: crime patterns are varying by city and town as well as by country. It's very difficult to detect what's happening. And certainly there is displacement from street crimes within the home. For example, residential burglary's gone down and commercial burglaries seem more vulnerable. Street crime has largely gone down because people aren't on the street, but crime in the home is getting worse. So there's been this displacement. As to the online bit, I think one of the most striking bits is we won't yet know just how big a deal this is. Certainly, the logic would be that there's going to be a massive shift. And we know in some cases there has been a shift, but it'll be interesting just how big that is. And that's going to take time because a lot of people won't discover it yet or won't discover it quickly. But the point about displacement is criminologists around the world have studied this as a concept. It becomes a big thing. And there are various types of displacement. Just for example, the one that's most commonly discussed is a displacement of place. But it could be a displacement of technique, a displacement of time. So there are various types of displacement, 5 or 6, 6 I think there are in all. But the point about displacement is that it hasn't generally been as much as you might think, and in some cases a lot less than you might think. And part of the reason I think for this is that if you manage to stop a crime there and then, it doesn't mean to say the person's then going to commit another one automatically. It depends on their explanation and their rationale for doing it. But a lot of the point about displacement, it's not as much as you might think. So there's a big issue here about stopping crime. If you can stop it there and then that is important. Because it's based on opportunity and instinct and that moment making that decision. If that moment isn't created for them, then you've taken away the opportunity and you've taken away the crime. So it's another point about being really good at security. And of course, this is where I think the security world has greatly undersold its skill. It strikes me that it's an extremely skilled world where there are experts doing really, really important work, often under the radar, often not appreciated, and by that mean in the great broader world of organizations and business about the effect they're having, but are highly skilled and very able. And one mistake along the way can have enormous consequences. And so being on the ball and getting organizations to focus on these issues is really, really important. Of course, a lot of the time, as your audience will know, it's not about talking security, it's about talking in a language that's relevant to the organization in terms they understand, so they get to do the things that are so crucial on the front line. And there's a real skill set to that, and there's a real set of techniques and abilities that come with the job. And part of my message to the security world is that we need to start talking about how good the really good people, teams, initiatives, and companies are.
There was a segue there. You talked about potentially just removing that opportunity, even for a period of time, will make all the difference. Maybe I thought we might touch on and potentially finish up on the insider threat and how you're talking about external facing offenders, how they may see a company or a building, whereas internally they're going to potentially view that organisation completely different. Maybe any related research that you're aware of, but just your discussion or your research and thoughts on the insider threat versus your intent and opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a really big issue, Chris. I've interviewed a lot of internal offenders over time, both petty offenders, those who've stolen just small amounts, fiddling type offenders, and those who've stolen millions from organisations. And once again, though, whether it's big or whether it's small, some of the reasons are exactly the same. They're based on not being appreciated, ease of opportunity, frustrations in life, some sort of problem outside. Addictions or need for money in other ways. And therein lies a real problem, I think, because I wonder how many employees in this period of crisis are worried about their job, resentful about the way they've been treated, perhaps by their employer, resentful about the situation and their employer is going to take the blame. They're working from home, where they know and understand systems that perhaps others in the organisation don't. This strikes me as a recipe for internal crime. And
Yep.
As we all know, that's a tricky one to manage and a tricky one to discover, particularly when the experts are the ones often managing the offence. It's not been spoken about as much, I think, around. And yet it's a really, really big deal, and I think one that that we may have to watch very, very carefully as this crisis unfolds, and as the focus perhaps comes back to some of the issues that are important in daily life. Security seems to be in the background. In fact, I've just listened, oddly enough, to a national broadcast here in while I was doing my gym this morning, Chris, I'll let you know, and it was about the Cyber Security Centre. They're introducing an app in the UK. To track whether people have had COVID-19 and to...
As they are here, everywhere, Martin.
Well, the thing is, we haven't got it here. We haven't got it. Right. So my point is, and there's a lot of concern here about it, a lot of concern. And they're just saying that they want to get at least 20% of the population on it, ideally 50%. But there's this real resistance about the state collecting information. They're just saying, how big a deal will it be? Anyway, the conversation that ensued from this was about the consequence of fraud and what happens if someone inside there is corrupt. How will it be? And I was interested because that's the first time I've heard it on a national radio station about that particular sort of worry. So has it worked in Australia, Chris?
Yes, they've launched it. I think they're about to hit 5 million downloads. Again, a lot of concern over privacy and the trust at a government level, but people are downloading it. They want to get out of their homes, whatever. I think they're prepared to offset whatever concerns they may have if it allows them to get outside. And I think it does come down to motivation, really, as that key aspect. People will change their behaviour or adopt behaviour if the motivation is right. One thing I was going to touch on, it's kind of there with the insider threat, and you've kind of just raised it even with the issues around apps and adopting traceable technologies. What type of message do you need to create, or what type of messaging and communication helps both sort of deliver the message both from the security aspect, but then also to potential offenders? How do you start to message out to an organisation? There's been a lot of coverage on remote working, security awareness of remote workforces, but not much about, security procedures, and, you do take a risk if you don't follow procedures. How do you balance between over-warning them, but then also balancing that behaviour where people are feeling sort of not looked after and are a bit sort of angry at the organisation?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think there's no short idea here about creating good cultures, increasing confidence, and explaining to people in terms that matter to them about the issues that they're concerned about. The message today was very much about on this app that there won't be much information on there that anyone could steal. Even if they stole it, it wouldn't tell them very much. A message to offenders is not a great deal of value in this. But the problem is, of course, wouldn't it be an achievement for an offender to break in and they'll never mind making money. What about all the message it will send out about it? And I think the trouble, it's one thing to say to offenders, and most of the time it's motivated by money, of course, as we know. But we all know that's not the whole story. And there's a certain kudos and challenge that comes with breaking the unbreakable. And so I think the thing about offenders is that they're looking for the easy opportunity to make money, but they're looking for the easy opportunity. And what we must do is not make it easy. And the best thing we can do, of course, is have good procedures and good policies that are good because people can follow them. We have an enormous amount of awareness, and we reduce the chances of offenders being successful and gaining from it, even if they are. And these are old-fashioned ideas that have been around in crime prevention and security from the start. And sometimes, in fact, I can't tell you how often on the webinars that I chair every Tuesday and Thursday, Chris, I'm thinking when people are saying, goodness me, these same old ideas hold good even today in every context that involves security. You never get away from it, really.
I think the biggest thing is also that consistency of message as well, because security is sort of all of the time, and they only need to, sort of the 1%ers only need to get through in order to commit that crime. And that's the other challenge, is to be on the ball all the time. And you did cover that in terms of best practice. What is really good security is that security that is there all the time and having an impact all the time.
And not interfere with normal business as well, of course. And this is why I make the point that, to me, the security was extremely skilled. There, you know, in doing the OSPAs around the world, it's now in 13 different countries. You know, one of the things that you learn from that is just how good some of these initiatives and people and companies and teams are. Really very, very good, having enormous implications, and largely, mostly operating under the radar, and even within their own organisations, you know. And to me, that it's not an idle issue to say we need to find out who the people who are good and not good just for some sort of celebration. It's because there are real implications here of getting it right, and even bigger ones of getting it wrong.
Okay, well, look, on that note, there is no questions. We've obviously answered them all, Martin. If there is any questions, you can stick up your hand now. But with that, we wanted to at least have Martin for half an hour, and with the prospect of leaving you wanting more. So Martin's webinars are available at the OSPAs. Is it the OSPAs.com, Martin?
Yeah, the OSPAs.com.
Wonderful. Look, thank you very much for that. No doubt we'll speak again. For the audience, I'm just going to run through what it is that we're actually doing here. We have a number of podcasts as well. Let me just jump ahead. So that, again, for the particularly for the Australian audience, asial.com.au Security Awards 2020, and that's going to be held in Sydney on the 22nd of October. And I believe nominations should still be live as well. And here in Australia, it's always been it's a good thing to see, actually, the ASIAL Awards, the Outstanding Security Performance Awards, and the Australian Security Medals Foundation have come together for an all awards night, which is excellent. For those that have missed our previous webinars, we've ran one on cybersecurity awareness for a remote workforce. These videos are available on our YouTube channel. And last week we had Dan Ehrenreich from Israel looking at BCP and DRP principles and processes for industrial control systems. And his full course on that is becoming available. For our podcast show, I've just finished an interview with Rory Metcalf on his book Contest for the Indo-Pacific, Why China Won't Map the Future, and you couldn't get a hotter topic right now than that. That's a very good book, but also a very good podcast where where Rory explains his Indo-Pacific both idea and a place, and how the Indo-Pacific is actually looking. For tomorrow, the Mega C-Suite Virtual Meetup Edition is on with Shemaine Tan. And again, this is with Mahiko Matsubura from Tokyo and Meg Vicelli from Singapore. And again, co-host with Stephen Lee in Tokyo also. And next week, we've got Vlado Damjanovsky, who is well known internationally as a CCTV expert. And we're very pleased to have Vlado with us. And we're looking at the video surveillance system standards. Australia's just adopted the IEC standards for video surveillance. I mentioned Dan Ehrenreich. If any of those are interested, his course on the IEC 62443 Industrial Automation and Control Systems Cybersecurity Workshop is coming online very shortly. And on that note, Martin Gill, I will thank you very much for joining us from the UK on our virtual educational series.